The second reading this week is from John chapter 11, verses 21 through 45, from the New International Version. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who is to come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to go to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he's been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth around his face. Then Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. Sometimes we all need hope in the middle of discouragement. Right now, in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic, life can seem pretty discouraging. Everything is shut down and sometimes we don't have much social interaction. But most people seem to be making the best of it by using social media and finding creative ways to use their time. In this Bible passage, Mary and Martha are both discouraged because they felt like their brother Lazarus would not have died had Jesus been there sooner. Of all the miracles Jesus performed, the raising of Lazarus from the dead had to be the greatest. He had brought other people back to life, but they had been dead for a short period of time. In the other 3 Gospels, there are accounts of people being raised from the dead. Jairus' daughter was shown in Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 through 26, Mark chapter 5, 21 through 43, and Luke chapter 8, 40 through 56. There's a story of the widow's son being raised in Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 16. According to Barclay, in both cases, the raising followed immediately after death. So it could be quite possible to believe that in both these miracles, the person raised was in a coma. Burial had to follow hard upon death in climate because of the climate in Palestine. And this is kind of gross, but we know from evidence of the graves that people were not infrequently buried alive because of that haste. It could well be that these were the miracles of diagnosis in which Jesus saved 2 young people from a dreadful death. But there's no parallel whatever for the raising of a man who had been dead for 4 days, whose body had begun to putrefy. Jesus could have healed Lazarus immediately. In the case of the centurion's son, Jesus would have only had to say the word and he would be healed. So why did Jesus wait 4 days to raise Lazarus from the dead? It was so that those who witnessed the event would believe. Jesus was very close to Mary and Martha. We have talked earlier about their story from the Bible in an earlier sermon. Martha has hope in the middle of discouragement because she says, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. But it doesn't seem she thinks Jesus is going to bring Lazarus back to life. Jesus said, your brother will rise again. But Martha said to him, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Martha has hope in the middle of discouragement, a hope of resurrection Then Jesus says these words to give her even more hope. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She shows her belief, her hope in the middle of discouragement by stating, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. After this, Martha went and called her sister Mary aside, and Mary went to him. Jesus showed how much he cared by weeping once he saw where Lazarus was laid. Some said, how he loved him, while others said, could he not he who opened the eyes of the blind man who we talked about last week keep the man from dying? All this points to the idea of belief, which is the theme of the entire Gospel of John. John starts out with this in the first chapter of John, chapter 1, verse 12. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. We see it in John chapter 3:16 and toward the end of the gospel. John writes in chapter 20, verse 31, But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. This is what Martha says. He is the Messiah, the Son of God. This shows her deep faith. Jesus used the I am statement here that is also found in many places in the Bible. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the bread of life. I am the door, I am the vine, you are the branches. When the soldiers came to arrest Jesus in the garden, they asked if he is Jesus of Nazareth, and he says, I am. I am refers back to when Moses met God at the burning bush and asked God his name, and God said, I am that I am. When they move on to the tomb, Jesus tells the reason for the whole situation. So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here so that they may believe you sent me. Jesus is talking about spiritual life and spiritual death when he says those that believe in him will never die. Lazarus will die a physical death again, but this is only temporary, but it demonstrates Jesus' power over death. So, there is hope in times of discouragement in Jesus. A favorite verse in my family is Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good for those that love God and who are called according to his purpose. What this means is God can make things work out for the good even if it's a bad situation. God didn't cause a bad thing to happen, but God can bring good out of something bad. A lot of times when we go through a traumatic situation like a pandemic, it tests our faith, but we can make our faith stronger in the long run. It can make our faith stronger in the long run. In James chapter 1, we are told, My brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. This event took place not long before Jesus goes into Jerusalem on a donkey. A lot of the people that were witnesses to the raising of Lazarus from the dead are there then as well. Jesus was showing he had power over death, and he would show that again. He himself would come back from the dead. So there's hope in the middle of discouragement. And as an aside note, I really do miss you all, and I miss seeing you on Sundays and on Wednesdays. And I hope this doesn't last too long, that we can get together again. So if you need anything, just keep in touch. You can email me or call me, and just let me know if you need anything. And I hope this all finds you safe and well.